Hello everybody and welcome to this photography class. What I want to teach you here in this video is in the shortest time possible all the essential basics of photography. I will tell you what are the basics that you need to know to have solid foundation in your photographic journey. If we want to talk about photography, the first thing we want to do is to define what is photography. And the term photography originates from two words in ancient Greek. Phos photos, that means light, and grapho, that means writing, means painting and all these kind of things. So photography, it means designing with light, painting with light. This is very important because we are in an era where a lot of things that are called photography are actually not photography. As an example, artificial intelligence is telling you that generates photographs, but is not true. It creates images using something that is computer science, something that is mathematics, something that is copy and paste from other things, but it doesn't use the light to write. So if you know what is photography, you know that you need to stick to the idea of writing with light to generate a photograph. And if you go far from that, you lose the meaning of photograph. If you modify your image enough with a lot of tools that use not light to paint, but use pixels, use something else, you don't create photography. You create perhaps another form of art, but cannot be called photography. So painting with light, it means that light is our brush, light is our pencil. We paint with light, we design with light. So it's important to know the light. The light is an electromagnetic wave. Of the electromagnetic waves, we take just a small portion with very specific frequency of wavelength, and in that we can find the light that we see. We can find the electromagnetic waves that we can perceive with our eyes. And by the way, we see the visible light, and now every camera sees the visible light, but actually in the history of photography it all started with a lot of film that were orthochromatic, so they were not able to see some colors, like some part of the spectrum, like the red, oranges and so on. With evolution, the film became panchromatic, and then we arrived to digital, and with digital we can even see much more than the human eyes. For example, I converted the Fuji X Pro 1, I converted it to infrared, so I took away the filters that limit the light arriving on the sensor to the visible light, and I put a filter that allowed infrared light to pass. And I obtained a camera that takes pictures with infrared. So we also can create photographs with something that is kind of non-visible light for our eyes, but still is considered light. To create a photograph, we need different things. One of them is obviously a light, a source of light that illuminates the subject, and the subject that reflects the light coming out. The other thing that we need is a sensitive material to light, something that can record the image that is projected on it. And this is very important. That can be a film, that can be a sensor, or that can be any sensitive material. And I give you a very simple example of photography that we experience in our lives since we are kids, and is our skin when we get a tan. If we just go outside in the naked, our skin will get darker in a uniform way, so that's not a photograph. But if we wear some swimwear, for example, we get a tan line, and that's basically the photograph of our swimwear. If we want to do something that is more precise, we want to decide what is the shape of the tan line, we can get some stickers. They were very trendy some years ago with teenagers. You get the sticker with different shape, you put it on your skin. It can be, you know, the star, the dolphin, the rabbit, all these kind of things. You put it on your skin, you go to tan, and at the end you peel off the sticker and your skin is perfectly clear and white under the sticker, and is tanned outside the sticker. So that is a photograph. It's something that we were able to focus an object and so give the perfect shape and do a photograph on our skin. And I will use this example many times because it really make easy to understand a lot of concepts of photography. In reality, what we need to create a photograph is not just light, but we need differences in light. Exactly as we do with the sticker of our skin, we see the shape because there was a different exposure between the part under the sticker and the part outside the sticker. So we need the difference of light, and we need the way to project this light with all its difference on our sensitive material. The first way that was used to project the image of a real sheen with light on a surface was the pinhole. The pinhole was used for ton of years. There are examples in the pyramids, and in the history a lot of culture and a lot of people did some very small holes in the shades, for example, of the window or something like that, to project the sheen in front of the room to the wall in the back of the room. So that was something that was used well before photography. And with photography, that is something that is very nice to play with, to understand a lot of things. A pinhole camera is very simple. You can imagine a box that keeps the light out. You have the sensitive material on one side, on the other side you have a little pinhole. It can be just a box, it can be something like this camera here, well designed with beautiful wood and all these kind of things. I used a lot my 4x5 camera. Instead of to have a lens in front of it, I just put a pinhole. The pinhole really tells us a lot. First of all, that you have to notice with the pinhole is that closer is the pinhole to the surface we want to project the image, and wider will be the angle, the field of view. So that is something that is very important and can teach a lot of things. Obviously, farther away and more kind of a telephoto lens will be the angle of view. The distance between the pinhole and the film or the sensor, that is the focal length of the pinhole. If you play with that, you can understand a lot of things. First of all, that larger is our focusing screen or film or sensor, and wider will be the angle, the field of view. Also, if you don't move the distance. Same distance, you enlarge the screen and you enlarge the field of view, the angle of view. And obviously, in the other way, smaller is the part of the image that we record, and smaller will be the angle. And that's the same that happens with focal lengths with lenses. It's very easy to play with a pinhole and a digital camera. You get the camera body cap, you put a hole in it, you attach a very thin material like tinfoil, you put a very little small pinhole in it, and you can play with a pinhole in your digital. By the way, if you want me to tell you more about the pinhole and how to play, let me know in the comment, I can do a video about it. But play with it is something that will teach you a lot of things. The problem with the pinhole to focalize the image on the sensitive material is that the pinhole is very small. To be kind of in focus, the pinhole is small. Actually, every image created with a pinhole is equally out of focus, and out of focus depends on the diameter of the pinhole. So you need something very small to project an almost sharp image, and that is a problem because obviously smaller is the aperture and less light will arrive on our sensitive material. That means very long exposure time, so it means sometime 1, 2, 3 minutes, 10 minutes of exposure just to have an image. To get over the limits of the pinhole, it's better to use a lens. And here I can talk you about the single lenses, the complex lenses, multiple lenses, but I will not go that deep. If you want me to go deeper, just let me know. The things that you have to learn about the lenses is the fact that lenses have a focal length, and the focal length, as said before, is the equivalent of the distance between the nodal point and the focal plane at infinity. Modern lenses, they don't use the distance, they have a way to change the distance of focus. They can be fixed on a body, but for example, if you use a view camera where you can use beautiful lenses that are symmetric, you will see that if you focus on a subject at infinity, The distance between the focal point of the lens and the plane of focus will be exactly the focal length. And as we have seen with the pinhole, more is long the focal length, more is long the distance, and obviously less will be the field of view and the angle. Shorter the distance, so shorter the focal length, and wider will be the angle. For any format or film or sensor, there's a focal length that is considered normal, because it gives you 45 degrees of field of view that is around what you see with your eyes. So the normal focal length, for example, on a full frame camera is around 50 millimeters, 35 on an APS-C. It can be 80 millimeters for a 6x6 camera. You can go to 4x5 view camera and it's 150 millimeters, 300 millimeters for 8x10, and so on. That's approximately the numbers. Everything that is shorter than a normal focal length will be a wide-angle lens. Everything that is longer will be a telephoto lens. And when you have a specific focal length, that is the focal length, the lens will have that kind of depth of field and all these kind of things. It's no matter if attached there's a very small sensor, so that's a telephoto, or a very large film, so that's a wide angle. All the characteristics of the lens will be the same. The angle of view depends just on the size of the sensor in the back. Obviously, if you want to create a lens that covers a very large image, will need to be a very big lens and be very expensive. For an APS-C, it's very easy to build very compact lenses, and so on. Enough with the lenses and move on. The most important thing in photography to understand is the exposure. Every material that is sensitive to the light, no matter if a film or a sensor, need a specific quantity of light on it to act properly. Again, you can think at your skin. If you are probably from Ireland, very red-headed and very white skin and something like that, you're very sensitive to the sun, probably half hour in a normal sun, and you are already burned and all red. If you are from Sicily, for example, usually darker skin color, you can stay 8 hours in the sun and it's not a problem for you. And it's the same for our film or our sensor. Depends on the sensitivity of the material. You will need a specific amount of sun to have a result and not get burned in the meantime. As I said before, you don't need just light on your sensor, you need differences of light. So you want something that you look around, you perceive the reality and the subjects around because there's a difference of light. Some object reflects more, some other reflect less, and all these kind of things. So you see differences of light. Where the light is totally uniform, you don't see anything. You just see, you can be in the fog and see a lot of luminous light, you can be totally in the dark, you don't distinguish any subject, it's just light. So for the film or sensor is the same. You need differences in what is the light that arrives to the film or the sensor. What you need to arrive on your film or sensor is a range of illumination, is a range of light. And it depends, all depends between the film or the sensor and these kind of things. In case of the film and the sensor, there's a kind of a lot of difference. It's very similar, but there's a very difference at the end. The film is very tolerant to highlights. You have no problem if there are highlights, the overexposure, the highlights that arrive to the film are usually kept in the curve of the film. While a digital sensor is very intolerant to the highlights, you arrive at the point that the sensor is saturated and the highlights are cut out, but is very tolerant to the low light. You can really bring out a lot of lowlights from the images. So that's the difference, but both of them, they need a specific range of light. With any camera, we have two ways to control the amount of light that reaches the sensor or the film. One is the shutter speed, the length of the exposure time, and the other one is the aperture. Imagine bucket, you want to fill it with water, you can have a very big pipe that just a tenth of a second and the bucket is filled up, or you can have a straw with really few water coming out and you let it there for a night and in the morning is filled up. So it's the same thing with the light in our camera. In theory, shutter speed and aperture are interchangeable. You can just open the lens or you can just elong the exposure, but in reality there are differences. Notice here I don't consider the ISO a way to control the light that comes into the camera. ISO changes the sensitivity of a digital sensor, but it doesn't change the amount of light coming in the camera. So we change the sensitivity, we don't change the light. The light depends only on the aperture and shutter speed. To understand the effect of shutter speed on a photograph is very easy. Shutter speed is intuitive. We have it in our life. So it's obvious that if we have a long time of exposure, we will see movement. If we have a very short time of exposure, we will have all the subject crisp. That can be a person running, that can be the usual river. If you photograph a river with a long time, you will see these white fluxes of water coming down, while if you are using a very short time, you will see all the drops freezing in the air. And by the way, with the time the camera express the time of exposure in fraction of seconds or seconds. So you have an exposure that is 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, or 1/100th of a second. So it's very easy for us to understand. The aperture is a different thing. The aperture is less easy to understand for two reasons. First one, the numbers that we see on the camera are not kind of intuitive, because the aperture that we see on the camera express the ratio between the focal length and the diameter of the aperture. So it's a ratio, and so it's inversed. We see small numbers when we have large apertures and large numbers when we have small apertures. And also it's not something that is linear, but we go from I don't know, 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11 and so on. So we have to just learn a little bit about that. There's all the mathematic things about that, and tell me if you want to know it, but just you have to know that small number, it means large aperture and vice versa. The effect of the aperture is also not that intuitive. We have to study that. And the effect of the aperture is that in photography, when you focus on something, you focus just on a plane that is parallel to the sensor of the camera, and the focus is exactly there. Everything in front or in the back of the plane of focus is actually out of focus. But our eyes, as a characteristic, they are not perfect. So anything that is smaller than a tenth of a millimeter, it becomes for us just a single point. We don't see it as a circle, but we see at a point. So this helps photography, because our defect of perception allows us to see in focus also part of the image that is behind or in front of the actual focus plane. The aperture affects it, because smaller is the aperture and wider will be the depth of field. So if you have a small aperture, a lot will be in focus in front or back to the camera. In old camera there was something that was very, very nice, and was a red spot usually that told you where to focus and what aperture to set to use the depth of field in your favor and have everything in focus. That is a setting that is fantastic to use. I use it a lot on all cameras, and was very evident red dot and was okay, because those cameras, they didn't have usually a system to measure the distance or to focus. It was just, you read the scale of distance and you estimate the distance and you put in your camera. So to have something that was using what is called the hyperfocal length, so it was a system just simply to a setting that had all in focus, and that was very, very nice, and that uses the depth of field. So it's the same thing with your camera. If you want to photograph a subject and you want to isolate it from the background, like on a portrait, use a very wide aperture and everything will be out of focus in the back. If you want everything in focus, small aperture, and so on. By the way, all the concepts that I are describing here, you can find it very well explained on this book that is Photography Life Manual. It's a nice book with very good reviews. You can go on the links up here or down here and you can find the book. So if you want to support the channel, get the book, and by the way, put a like, subscribe and share with your friends. What we have to notice here is that a change in aperture, for example, between 2 and 2.8, 2.8 and 4, and so is called a stop. A stop is something that cut in half or double your exposures, and one stop is exactly what happens if you double or cut in half your time of exposure. So it can be equivalent. If you have a subject, the correct exposure, you go with your exposure meter. You have an exposure, for example, of 1/60th of a second at f8. You can go f11 1/30th of a second, or you can go f5.6 at 125th of a second. So that is something that is essential to know. You can exchange in the same way with the very easy relation the aperture with the shutter speed. Obviously, depends what you want in your photographs. Sometimes you want depth of field, so you go with long shutter speed and very close aperture and so on. And all depends on the light you have, and all depends on the sensitivity of the material you are using. In case of film, it's something that is established in the factory for the film, and you cannot change, at least not doing something strange in the developing, but you cannot change it. With the digital camera you can change it, and with the digital camera it seems easy to, I just go up with my ISO or these kind of things, but if you go up with your ISO you introduce things like noise, digital noise, or this kind of things, other artifacts in the image. So you don't want. The idea is stay always as low as possible at ISO and go up only in situation where you cannot do in a different way. And now you can say, yes, that's all easy, but how do I know how to set up the camera to let only the right amount of light enter in the camera? It's very simple. Use an exposure meter, and your camera, modern camera, all have exposure meters inside. So let the camera kind of in automatic, and she will do everything for you. Or you just put an automatism like aperture priority, so you set the aperture, the camera set the shutter speed. Or if you go manual, read what the exposure meter in the camera says and just copy the settings from the exposure meter. That's very easy. If you do film, the same. You can have a camera, an exposure meter in your camera, or you can use an external exposure meter, as I do often with large format and other cameras. So you have a sheen, you use an exposure meter, and you will know how to expose. Or you can just go with something as the Sunny 16 rule that says under the sun f15 and the shutter speed is 1 over the ISO. So it will be very easy to do. Sunny 16 rules being used many times. I use it many times, sometimes with cameras that when I'm lazy, cameras that I like on film. I go around, they don't have an internal exposure meter. I'm around, it's a sunny day, and I don't even take out my exposure meter. I just put f16 and I'm okay with the 101 over the ISO. So that is really easy. But normally use the exposure meter. If you want to be precise, your camera can do really a great job. All modern cameras, they do really a great job. The only thing that you have really to understand about the exposure meter, and this is one of the most essential things, is the exposure meter is stupid. And I mean it. If you point an exposure meters, no matter how evolved is your camera, or how much in artificial intelligence use and all these kind of things, if you point your meter to a subject that is uniform, like a wall, gray wall like here, you point your camera to it, the exposure meter would presume that the subject is medium gray, and reflectance 18% and all these kind of things. The medium gray is defined photographically as something that is very important for the exposure, but the camera cannot know if it's looking at something that is black, that is white, that is it's something uniform. So the camera will not know, and it will assume that is something that is absolutely a middle gray. So if you are photographing a white wall, you will have to overexpose to not have it gray on the final result, or a black wall you have to underexpose to have the result black on the final result. So that will be something really to understand, that the exposure meter is absolutely stupid, and always assume that what you photograph is a medium gray. Modern cameras, they have all these beautiful exposure meter that analyzes the sheen and all these kind of things, but at the end of the game they cannot see if something is different from a medium gray light intensity of the camera. When you use the automatic system in your camera, the exposure meter in your cameras, what is essential is to know them. Use them enough so you understand when they can fail and when they are correct and all these kind of things. If you really want to learn how to expose and all these kind of things, go with the zone system and Ansel Adams, and you will have all your answers there. The technical side of photography is kind of very easy, and really learn how to expose the film or the sensor and this kind of things is something that you can do in a few minutes. It's very, very easy to do. Something that in photography is absolutely essential and distinguish a good photograph to a bad photograph and these kind of things is composition. Obviously, the most important part is to decide what to photograph, how to photograph it, and how to compose the image and all these kind of things. And composition is one of the most complex things to learn. The only things that I will tell you here is that if you want to learn composition, put in the trash everything that is an easy trick, like the rule of thirds, like all these kind of things. Just put all them in the trash and go to read something as Visual Perception by Rudolf Arnheim or this kind of books. You have to go deep in the composition. By the way, a photographer that explains it in a practical way, beautiful books, is Sam Abel. It's very a master to show you how the composition change your photographs. If I have to tell you something that I consider the basics of the composition, is that every image inside must have an equilibrium. So every part of the image must be in equilibrium with other part of the images, and it all depends what you want to communicate. A stupid example, if you have a bicycle going in the image, something, you know, a horizon with a bicycle, if it's on the right frame of the image, is going out. If it's on the left frame of the image, is coming in. So this is the thing that you will learn with composition. There is an equilibrium in the space that you use, in the frame that you use, and there are many ways to compose an image to communicate different things. That is absolutely essential and is the most difficult part of photography, and is the part that nobody cares about. Everybody's concentrated on technical aspects, on what menus to use, what gadgets to use, and all these kind of things. But the difference between a bad photograph and a great photograph usually is the composition. To learn how to expose correctly, use the light correctly, it's easy. To learn how to compose an image and how to master the use of light to play with the composition, that will be the difficult part that you will have to study and study for a lot of time. If you want me to tell you something deeper in this, just let me know. It will not be easy, but I can put a class on about the composition. So now you have seen what is a camera, what came out, and all these kind of things. In case of digital, we have a sensor, we have a digital file, the image is in a digital format, and we have to understand few simple things. First of all, that our sensor is actually black and white sensor. The sensor is not able to see the color. The color are seen because in front of the sensor there's a filter with a Bayern pattern, so it put a filter RGB on the single pixels, and the single pixels can read a value of R, G or B, so read green or blue, and that gives the color. And to create the colors for each pixel, there's an algorithm that elaborates the colors of the pixels or RGB under the Bayer pattern and convert them in a triplet of color with all the three RGB values for every pixel. That is something that you need to know, because that is what changes a lot with your digital photography. As I said, the file is basically black and white files with the filter in front of it. So to convert it to a color file with triplet of RGB for every pixel, you need a software. Your camera has a software inside that can do it, or you can use a software on your computer that converts the raw to other formats and do that with much more power on your computer. The software that you have inside your camera usually, yes, is optimized for your camera, but is not very powerful. The one used on your computer can be not optimized for your camera, but is very, very powerful. You have to extract the digital data from a monochrome with a biome pattern to something that is in use of color. And the other things you need to know about your sensor is the fact that when you have digital information is expressed in bit, and if you have 1 bit you can express just 0 or 1, so 2 values. If you have 2 bits are 4 values, and so on. If you have 8 bits it's 256 values, and if you have 16 bit it's much more, 35,000 or something. So at the end of the game, more bit you use and more information you have. Your sensor usually is 10-bit or 12-bit, depends on the sensor, but you can work then on 16 bits or 8 bits. JPEG is always 8 bits and all these kind of things. You don't want to use a lower number of bits. Use always the largest possible number of bits to retain more information. Obviously with film it's different. If you have your latent image on the film, it's not finished like that. You don't have the image until you develop the film, fix the film, and go all through the process. It's a lot of fun. I always suggest to use film to learn photography. If you are a beginner, get a film camera and learn a film camera, and you will learn everything about photography, having a lot of fun. It's much easier than to learn digital straightforward. So go with the film camera and have fun with the film camera. But with the film camera you must know that when you have taken the pictures, it's not ended. The developing and all these kind of things will require time, will require money, and will require efforts. And will require also skills you have to learn. Other essential things that you have to learn with digital is the color management. There's a system that is the ICC standard of color profiles and all these kind of things. It is something that writes down color management. Basically, sensor, again, they are stupid, they don't know what they are seeing. As I told you, the sensor is monochrome with a biome pattern in it and all these kind of things. So you will have numbers that, if they are not associated to something that is objective, you don't know how to interpret. And let me tell you, if I give you a triplet of values, RGB values, it can be anything. I can put that values on a different device, and the different device is set in a different way. I will see different colors. So basically the color management is something that create a table that put the value that you have from your camera, it put in relation to something that is a table, the lab, that is an objective table. For example, you have a triplet of colors that in your camera are the yellow of the canary that you can find in the Barbados Island, and it will say this triplet corresponds to the yellow of the canary you can find in the Barbados Island, and so on. So that's something that actually, when you have your values compared to something that is actually the LAB space, but is an objective list of values, you can give this table around and people will know what they are supposed to look at. So they will know the settings of your cameras and all these kind of things. It's not easy to explain in just few words. So if you want to do something serious with digital photography, check out the color management, and that is something that is absolutely essential to go on. Short term, you want a color space that is wider as possible when you take pictures. For example, your camera usually has sRGB or Adobe RGB. Go always with Adobe RGB. If you take images in a raw file, the color space will not be assigned by the camera, but will be assigned by the converting software. So in that case, always keep the largest color profile possible. In my case, I go with Profoto usually, but you will have to learn how to convert the images between profiles. It depends. If you want to print, you will need the profiles for the printer and all these kind of things. It's very easy when you learn how to use it. It's not that easy to explain. I always do an example of this, and this with a toaster. Imagine you bought a toaster and you arrive at home. Your toaster is beautiful with a knob that go from 0 to 10. You try all with your bread, you put that your bread, try all the setting of your toaster, and you're so happy because number 5 is perfect toast. You speak with a friend, she just got a toaster by herself, and you say, oh, number 5 is fantastic, the perfect toast. She arrives at home, put the toast inside her toaster, number 5 comes out that is horrible. And what is the problem? That the toasters are different. Your toaster is 0 to 10 as a setting, her is 0 to 17, for example. And your toaster has some power, her toaster is much more powerful. So not all the settings are the same. You are exchanging numbers, but without an objective way to describe the number is difficult. So what do? You get all your toast and you do a table of toast from perfect to perfectly raw to burned with the perfect in the middle, and you send and tell to her, oh, okay, number 5 is perfect for me, and number 5 corresponds to this on this objective table. And so she knows at that point that when you say number 5, in reality you are saying that specific beautiful toast, perfectly toast, and she will create a table on the other side to convert the perfect values to her values on her toaster. So you can communicate. If you say 6 on this, she will see what toast to compare in an objective way, and she will see on the other side that, oh, that perfect toast on my machine corresponds to 13 as a setting on a knob. Your toaster can be something that just have the heating system in columns, so it will come out with stripes on it, and her toaster can be something with a grid that came out with the toasted grid or something like that. So there's always a lot of information that you have to attach to the numbers when you transfer the numbers, if you want the numbers to have an objective value. The other thing that is really essential to learn is that camera doesn't make the pictures, you are. The tools you use are not that important. What is important is how much you learn how to use the light, how to manage the light, how to choose the right light, choose the right subject, compose the image, and so on. Camera is totally secondary to everything you do. Right now, if you go with digital, any camera above 12 megapixels that you can find on the market, also from 20 years ago, is perfect. It has enough to take great pictures. So don't concentrate on the tools, don't concentrate on that, but go out and learn the light. There are beautiful books around about illumination. There are beautiful books about composition, all these kind of things. Look at other photographers, look at the history of photography, and have fun with that. Thank you for watching, see you next time.